Thank you, John. Okay. A spirit's dissertation on the role of mediums. 225. The following dissertation, given spontaneously by a high order spirit who revealed itself through highly sublime communications, clearly and completely summarizes the issue of the medium's role.
Okay, thanks. So just keep in mind, this was given spontaneously, and that is important. It's not requested. It's not, he was not called to provide us a dissertation, which means that he found that to be important in the preparation of this book, in the preparation of the doctrine as a whole. Remember that this is the primary book of the codification. The spirits of truth, of course, found it was important to bring this dissertation of Erastus. And it was done spontaneously. Again, it's not called for it. And now that I revealed his name, we know that Erastus was a companion or colleague, a good friend of Paul of Tarsus. He was an administrator in the city of Corinth who became follower of Jesus. And Timothy was, I believe, was his nephew, but he called him his son in true son in faith. So Timothy and Paul was very close together as well. And we know that Erastus is one of the main spiritus group of the Spirit of Truth that was responsible to depart to educate us in mediumship. Okay.
We continue.
Yes, please.
Okay. John? Okay, thank you. Whatever may be the nature of writing mediums, whether mechanical, semi-mechanical, or simply intuitive, our procedures for communicating through them do not vary essentially. Actually, our communications with incarnate spirits, as well as spirits per se, occur solely by the radiation of our thought. Our thoughts do not have to be clothed in words in order for spirits to understand them. All spirits perceive the thought that we want to transmit to them by the simple fact that we direct it to them, and this according to the degree of their intellectual faculties. This means that a specific thought can be comprehended by some according to their respective advancement, whereas for others the same thought will not be perceptible, as it awakens no memory or understanding in the depths of their hearts or minds. In such a case, the incarnate spirit who acts as our medium is more appropriate for transmitting our thought to other incarnates, even though it does not understand the thought, something a discarnate but less evolved spirit could not do if we depended on its mediation. This is because the earth-bound being gives its body as an instrument at our disposal, which the discarnate spirit cannot do.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay.
There's an echo in the background. Okay. So first of all, an absolute must to us understand communications not only in mediumship but communication in the spiritual world. We have just completed a part of the spirit's book that deal with sensations of the spirit. Our communication with incarnate spirits as well as the spirits per se occurs solely by the radiation of our thought. We have stated that a million times. It's rather abstracted for us to have such an abstract thought that we are able to communicate solely by the radiation of energy is called thought. Keep in mind that thought is an energy, and when you radiate that energy does not come clothed with words. The word is clothed by the receiver, basically. Okay? Um, and that is equal when a spirit, a discarnate spirit, want to communicate among themselves in the spiritual world. It is the same when a spirit communicates with us, and communicate with us mediums, all of us mediums. If you receive an intuition, if you receive a guidance from a spiritual mentor, if you perceive a message coming from our loved one that you are in tune with, we are receiving the thought. They are not saying words in our ears and we hear it. It's done by the radiation of their thought. And when a, a spirit is using a medium to pass its thoughts, to pass its messages to other incarnate, you make use of a medium. And that medium will expand its own perispirit that will be a good recipient of the radiated thoughts of a spirit. That's how a medium functions. You receive the thought, and then of course it has to close the thought. Okay. Now, it's very interesting that he says over here, Ron always use the example of we walking through 50th Avenue during Christmas time, right? I mean, it's a million people walking by. And they all talking among themselves. We barely see them. They're almost hitting us, so many people together, because you not pay attention to them, because they are not of our interest. If there is something in someone that caught our attention, we will pay attention and we will hear and we will see those individuals. Other than that, we go about our business. It here says, "O Spirit, perceive the thought that we want to transmit to them by the simple fact that we direct it to them, and this according to the degree of the intellectual faculties." So very important that, because one may intend, well, I radiate my thoughts. I radiate my thoughts. Does it go everywhere? It spreads in the air. The Ross's experiment was that you radiate your thought directed at someone to whom you want to receive those thoughts. So it's a very specific radiation of energy. It's not everywhere to everyone. Otherwise, it would be a mess, right? Now, can it happen? Of course it can. If you go, as we have seen in the books of André Luiz, to listen to a lecture in the spiritual world, that thought is radiated to all present in that room. Now it's up to each one in that room to also direct their attention to those thoughts. The same way here. When a teacher speaks in a classroom for 45 students, he's not selecting one or another. He's speaking to the all 45. Unfortunately, very often, not all of the 45 are paying attention, not all of the 45 care to receive those thoughts that are addressed words, in the case of us incarnate, of course. So in the spiritual world, that leaves very clear to us also that The thought is specific, directed at someone. It's radiated specifically at someone. So if I end up in the spiritual world, let's say in a dream, and I'm truly there, and I meet my mom over there, and if you want to have a conversation, we will have a conversation via thought, of course, even if I use my mouth, and because I'm not conditioned to communicate only via thought, the communication will be via thought, but I will use mimicking communication as an incarnate, because that's how I am conditioned. And so you my mother, otherwise I will miss it. But the communication is done via the radiation of thought. And the conversation will be between my mother and I. And if there is another 100 people, another spirits around us, they will not receive the radiation of those thoughts, because it's not of their concern, because it's not radiated towards them. Okay, is that clear? That's very important concept for us to understand as well. Further out, something very important also. A spirit will receive those thoughts in a way that it's able to, in accordance to its intellectual development. Okay, so it says, that means that a specific thought can be comprehended by some according to their respective advancement, whereas for others, the same thought will not be perceivable, as it awakes no memory or understanding in the depth of their hearts and minds. The same thing over here. If a astrophysicist PhD is giving a lecture for 45 people over there, and along those 45 people, there is a 5 years old. They're being average smart, not the little genius that I have seen around there. It will completely bypass them. You make no sense. You'll be a bunch of nonsensical noise, because it lacks the ability to connect with the radiated thought. It lacks what's the expression they use over here? It will not awaken any memory or understanding for that 5 years old in that lecture. Okay, and keep in mind, they use in the depth of their hearts and minds. So we use the word intellectual. Okay, and with the word intellectual, we use the depths of hearts and minds. And remember what Christ used to say very often, the intelligence of the heart. So here there is a component of purely intellectual, and there is a component of also moral. The moral intelligence. The moral intelligence is also important in the understanding of things, not only purely the minds. And we will see the importance of that later on. Also very important. And here in this paragraph, he ends here with the value of mediumship for spirits. Okay. How important mediumship is for those spirits to having an instrument, mediums, who are able to receive their thoughts and pass to others who are not able of receiving those thoughts because they lack something here. They have the depth of the intellectual abilities in their heart and in their minds. So the medium can be used, and João just explained that is mediumship in the spiritual world as well. A medium can be utilized to transmit the thoughts of what the spirits, in a sense that others will be able to grasp, because the medium will be able to put it in a way that is easier for those individuals to receive it. And for us, of course, um, like our works in the leadership meetings, a spirit, rebellious, not understand the situation of being discarnate, may not be able to interact, to receive the radiate of the thoughts of a spirit, because it's so conditioned to matter that by using a medium, it can reach the thoughts to that suffering spirit. So we always say is that the spirit doesn't need the mediums, perhaps not, but the medium is a very useful, a very powerful instrument at the hand of spirits who wants to do good. And unfortunately, it can be used for those who want to do good as well. You can go ahead,
Okay.
or if there's any questions, just go ahead and ask.
Thus, whenever we find mediums whose minds are full of knowledge acquired during their present lifetime, and whose spirits are rich in previously acquired latent knowledge proper for facilitating our communications, we would prefer to employ them, for then the phenomenon of the communication will be much easier for us than through mediums of limited intelligence, and whose previously acquired knowledge is insufficient. We will try to make ourselves better understood through some clear and precise explanations. With mediums whose current or previously acquired intelligence is developed, our thought is communicated instantly, spirit to spirit, through a faculty inherited in the essence of the spirit itself. In this case, we find the appropriate elements in these mediums' minds for clothing our thought with the corresponding words. Whether these mediums are intuitive, semi-mechanical, or entirely mechanical. That is why that in spite of several spirits communicating through the same medium, the data received from them always bears the personal stamp of the medium, both in form and in style. Because although the thought is not exclusively the medium's own, or the topic is not part of his or her customary concerns, and even though what we want to say does not derive from him or her in any way, the medium does not cease to exert a personal influence on the form by giving it individualized qualities and properties. It is precisely like when you look at several places through tinted lenses, green, white, or blue. Although the places and objects are entirely different and totally independent from one another, they nonetheless always appear with the colorization given to them by the various lenses. A better example, let us compare mediums to those glass bottles that are filled with colored and transparent liquids and that may be seen in drugstores. Well, then, we are like luminous focal points shining on certain moral, philosophical, and psychological inner scenes, illuminating them through blue, green, or red mediums in such a way that our luminous rays take on their colorizations. In other words, our rays must pass through glass that varies in degrees of cut and transparency, which means mediums with different degrees of intelligence. Our rays only reach those objects that we want to illuminate by taking on the colorization or personal style of these mediums. Finally, to finish with one more comparison, we spirits are like musical composers who have composed or would like to improvise on an air and have only one of these instruments at our disposal: a piano, a violin, a flute, a basin, or a 10-cent whistle. There is no doubt that with the piano, the flute, or the violin, we will play our piece satisfactory to our listeners. Even though the sound of piano, bassoon, or flute is each essentially different for each instrument, our composition will always be the same one in spite of the differences in sound. However, if we only have the 10-cent whistle at our disposal, we will run into difficulties.
Thank
In-
you.
okay.
Okay, so this is, it's so well explained and so easy for us to understand now that it's hard to complement. A medium is an instrument at the hand of the spirit. And it's obvious, the better the instrument, the better the end result of whatever is being done. If you give a properly tuned instrument at the hands of a musician, the music will be better. If the instrument's not properly tuned, or if the instrument cannot be tuned. If you give a properly sharpened knife to a butcher, you probably do a much better work than if you give them a knife, give him or her a knife that's not sharp enough, or that is cannot be sharpened anymore. For anything that we do, the better the instrument, the better the end result. For some fields of work, if the instrument's not properly, you just cannot do the work, right? What would be different with mediumship? The thing is, the mediums, the spirits will use what they have at their disposition. They will, when possible, select the better instrument. If they only have a less desirable instrument, that's they will use, they'll do the best that they can do with that instrument. So what is a good medium, a good instrument for the spirits to use? This is very interesting here. Whenever we find mediums whose minds are full of knowledge acquired during the present life, and those whose spirits are rich in previously acquired latent knowledge, proper for facilitating our communication. This intellectual ability is essential for the medium, for the spirit, I'm sorry, I keep saying the medium, for the spirit to utilize that instrument to select, let's say, words that on the lexicon, the richness of the vocabulary that medium has acquired in this present life. If the spirit is giving a communication that has to do with philosophy, amongst the many mediums, if there is one who have studied philosophy or studies philosophy or practices philosophy, let's say is a teacher of philosophy, that medium, you'll be a better instrument for someone who, let's say, who's in the field of mathematics and don't care at all about philosophy. I'm not saying that the two don't match, they do. The philosopher may be a good mathematician, and the mathematician may also enjoy philosophy, okay? I'm just using examples here. Because it facilitates the work of the spirit, when it's used that instrument, it grasps the instrument itself, will grasp those radiate thoughts with much easy, and you'll be able to pass it over to express this in its own words with much greater easy. And that facilitates the work. It's is that they are as if they are instrument, medium, and spirit in a very harmonious state, is if they are in synchrony, so to say, when in the communication happens at easy, and the communication will happen at easy almost instantaneously, And he says over here something that is important. The medium whose current or previously acquired intelligence is developed, our thoughts communicate instantly, spirit to spirit, now, through a faculty inherent in the essence of the spirit itself. What is it? It was not revealed to us. But I think fascinating this is there is an essence that is inherent in the spirit, us, incarnate and discarnate, that allows that communication to happen immediately. Now, what's important is that these acquired intellectual abilities may not be from this present reincarnation that we have right now. It's not solo on that one. The spirits will use to retrieve information from previous existence, from previous knowledge that medium, eternal spirit, has acquired in previous reincarnations, in previous work. The spirit cannot put anything there that it's not already there. But if it's there, and in this incarnation, it's not being utilized, the spirit may be able to retrieve that knowledge that is there latent. It's not being utilized now. So again, the example that I usually use, Elmo, or the eternal spirit playing the role of Elmo, as Elmo only know a little of English, Portuguese, and very little Spanish. But it's very likely that the eternal spirit playing the role of Elmo has other languages, especially for us who are from the New World. It's very likely that we had experiences in other continents, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe. So it's very likely that the spirit plays the role of Elmo has other languages. It's not being utilized now. So I could, in a mediumnic trance, give a communication in Greek, which absolutely have no knowledge as Elmo. Or perhaps in previous incarnation, I had lived in Greece and have learned some Greek. I cannot retrieve it myself, but an spirit who was utilizing me for communicating is able to go and retrieve those informations. And if the spirit, if I do have, it becomes easy for that spirit to retrieve that information. Now, we always say that over here, the communication is not 100% completely free from the instrument itself. There is always a degree of participation of the medium in a communication. It's impossible to be 100% completely absent of the medium in a communication. And Erasmus do that clear. That's why that in spite of several spirits communicating through the same medium, the data received from them always bear the personal stamp of the medium, both in form and style. So somebody gives me a piece of, I don't know, a poem or poetry for me to recite and give to me, and give to João, and give to Zoraida, and give to Carol. We all have the same paper, the same message at hand. Mm. And when you go to recite it to the public, the poetry will be the same. By each one of us, we will have our accent, we have our intonation, you have the musicality that we place when you recite that. The message will be the same, the poetry will be the same, but each one of us will have our own input on that. and that always will be the same. I do not get any credit for that poetry. I did not write it, nor does Ron, nor does Sarida, nor does Carol. It's all come from someone else, but it has that minimal part of each one of us. That is the way that we like to read a poetry. That is the way that we feel that poetry. That's why that is the way that we find the best way to express that poetry. It will be different for each one of us because we are different, but the message will be the same. That's very important. And he explains it in many different ways by using the coloration. And he complements over here. In other words, our rays, thoughts, must pass through a glass that varies in degrees of cut and transparency, which means mediums with different degrees of intelligence. Again, if the spirit is given a communication that deals with philosophy, and there is in there a doctor in the medium is a doctor of philosophy, that would be so easy for that spirit to pass it through. If you can utilize someone like myself, it will struggle to pass it message through. And it will pass with limitations, and that spirit will be smart enough to understand my limitations and use me as the only available instrument to the best they can. It's not going to be the best possible message in philosophy. That would be if the medium was in this incarnation or in previous incarnation, a doctor in philosophy. That's obvious. And then the example that he uses here to further clarify after beating on this point so many times, he used the instruments, which I think is just phenomenal example to be used. When it says, we spirits are a musical composer who have composed, would like to improvise on an air and have only one of these instruments at our disposal: a piano, a violin, a flute, a bassoon, or a 10-cent whistle. There is no doubt that with the piano, the flute, the violin, we will play our piece satisfactorily to our listener, even though the sound of the piano, the bassoon, the flute is each essentially different for each instrument. Our composition will always be the same, one in spite of the differences in sound. However, if you only have the 10-cent whistle at our disposal, we would run into difficulties. Again, the piano, the bassoon, the flute, the violin, they are all different, but they can all express the notes of the composition with fidelity. It will express in a different way, in a different voice, so to say. The piano has a voice, has musicality, has intonation that's peculiar to the piano, which is different from the flute, but they can both transmit those notes by note with fidelity. To do the same with a 10-cent whistle, good luck.
Okay.
Is there any question here? This is fundamental for us.
Yeah, I was thinking of the, we can only imagine the relationship between Divaldo and Joana de Angelis, Chico Xavier and Emmanuel, right? It goes to the very beginning of what we were reading, right? The spirit to spirit, the essence, the connection, right?
I thought such a big teaser of him to put a sentence here, through a faculty inherent in the essence of the spirit itself. I mean, like, go on. I need some more on that. I need to explain a little bit more of the essence. But I think it's going to be for a few reincarnations from now for them to reveal that to us. But that, I think, is the key. We have that essence as a spirit to have this instantaneous communication when, of course, we are so much in tune, let's say, Divaldo and João de Angelis, Chico Xavier and Emmanuel, that it had things happening basically automatically as impossible for us even to imagine how great that must be. And at the same time, the struggle that perhaps we put to even our guardian angels and people try to help us when we derail our thoughts into things that are not so compatible with their elevation, with the quality of their radiated thoughts. If we could just elevate ourselves a little bit more consistently, we would make our life a lot easier for them to help us, not for them, but for them to help us.
Yeah, I think the worst problem is that we really don't pay attention to that. That's their problem with us, right? Well,
Yeah,
our problem actually.
Yeah, and he lived it clearly to us, right? I mean, they radiate the thoughts direct to us, but if you don't get to listen, it's a problem. Okay, we continue.
Okay. In fact, when we have to use little advanced mediums, our work becomes slow, tedious, because we must resort to incomplete forms of expression, which is an impediment to us. We are then forced to break down our thoughts and dictate word by word, letter by letter, which is tiring and fatiguing to us and comprises a real restraint on the promptness and development of our manifestations. That is what,
Thanks.
okay.
Um, I keep using the word educated medium. So that's exactly what I try to mean when I use the term educated mediums, uneducated mediums. An educated medium is the one who will indeed facilitate the work of the medium, the spirit to communicate it with us, is to allow that radiation of thought be easily received or instantaneously received in some cases and pass through to the general audience. Because remember, the medium is receiving a psychography that is number one for him or herself, but equally important to be distributed to others. So the medium will receive that thought. And I should have mentioned before, keep in mind that regardless of the type of medium, being in a fully mechanical, fully unconscious medium, or semi-mechanical, or a fully intuitive or fully conscious medium, the process is the same. Okay? The medium will always be interpret of the thought of that thought. Or naturally, the more unconscious it is, the easier it is the process, because now the spirit can have much freedom to explore the faculties, the abilities of that medium. Okay, but in either way, the process will be the same. Now, if a spirit approximates to the perispirit of a medium, and they found a vast lexicon, let's say, of the language that he's going to use, a vast vocabulary, it'll be easy to put the word, to put the thought, to cover those thoughts with words. If that in the medium has a limited lexicon, a limited vocabulary in that particular language, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Then the medium we may have to cover those thoughts they received and understand it, but when it's time to cover with words, you may have a difficulty because it lacks the expanded vocabulary required for that. So instead of use, let's say, one word, you may have to use a whole paragraph to express the thought. which makes it more difficult, more lengthy. And if the vocabulary is even smaller, more tedious, more difficult it will be. And I mean, you just use vocabulary because it's easy to understand, but it can the same will be for anything else. If the topic of discussion is biology, the more that medium has acquired in the present or previous reincarnation knowledge in biology, the easier will be the communication, perhaps even instantaneous. For someone who has limited understanding of biology, the difficulty is greater, and the spirit you have to minimize the amount of information is able to pass through that medium. It's just plain obvious, right? So when I say educated medium, this is exactly what I say over here. And keep in mind the intelligence of the heart and of the mind.
Hey, Elmo.
Yep.
This is a little bit hard to digest.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always, been preaching regarding training, and I always use in comparison how it's done in Brazil, and here is different. We even spoke in the past that depending what kind of mediumship you work, it becomes impossible for you to have the time to train, to develop. So it's pretty much the medium, him or herself, needs to apply on the studies, and sometimes it becomes a lonely journey in order to become a better medium, not only to improve him or herself, or but also to become a better tool in order to translate all the message and everything. So when I see this phrase here, the way they describe it hit me a little bit hard.
Which one?
The one that says that it becomes tedious and and slow, and when the media is not, like as you mentioned, fully developed, or is in a medium process, or whatever is the word I can find here in the paragraph. So so the question would be, is that only on the medium? Is that is a group thing in order to support? I mean, because even in our group, we see that there's not, in terms of psychography, there's not many mediums that do the psychography. We have a lot of psychophony mediums, but the psychography mediums is just just a few of them. So given the way we study that, everything is important, otherwise we'll not be doing something that is not important. Given the importance of that, don't you think that perhaps, the approach, the way we do things should be a little bit different? In terms of training, in terms of helping, in terms of sharing, all that, because the message is for everyone and the work needs to be done, I think, from everyone in order to benefit everyone.
No, I don't think so. I think the work is done the way it suggests by the doctrine to be done. I think in a group where there is multiple mediums, if the mentors of the house utilize one or another for psychographers, they know what they're doing, they know the instruments, they know the capability of the instruments, and they choose those individuals for their own reasons. I don't think we need to try to figure this out. It's beyond us. And I think that each one of us should do our best to be a best possible instrument on our hand, in our heads in general, And but in general, it's to educate ourselves in all fields to the best of our abilities. It's not for any one of us in our particular group to say he or she should be doing this kind of work because he or she has better training or this on this or on that. But we don't know because again we know very little even of ourselves. But there in the spiritual world, when they know us, in much greater depth that we know ourselves, meaning that they can retrieve information from us that we cannot retrieve from ourselves in a conscious state. They know what they're doing. If they select one to provide psychographies, it's because that instrument is good and ready to provide psychography, or because they want to utilize that instrument to provide psychography as a training to provide greater psychography in the future. So I don't see any reason to modify anything, but completely trust that they know what they're doing, that they are using the instruments accordingly to their abilities, and it's up to each one of us to continue to improve to the best of our abilities.
Thank you.
Okay, continue, Emma.
Yeah, please.
Okay. That is why we feel fortunate to find mediums well prepared, sufficiently equipped, and furnished with mental elements that can be quickly utilized. In other words, good instruments. For then our perispirit, acting upon the perispirit of whomever we mediumize, only has to give impulse to the hand, which serves as a pen or pencil holder. With badly equipped mediums, we are obliged to perform a work similar to when we have to communicate by means of raps, that is, letter by letter, word by word, in order to form the sentences that translate the thought to be transmitted. This is the reason why we prefer enlightened and educated classes of individuals to diverge spiritism and develop writing mediumship. Although in such classes we also encounter the most incredulous, rebellious, and morally depraved individuals. It is also the reason why, if nowadays we allow little advanced spirits to transmit tangible communications through raps and apportations, the least serious persons among you also prefer phenomena that touch their eyes and ears to those of a purely spiritual and psychological nature.
Okay, thanks. So naturally, beyond only have the intellectual abilities of the heart and of the mind of the medium, there is always a degree of affinity also, right? So again, use the example of the spirit who wants to communicate, subject being philosophy, the doctor of philosophy as a medium, as a doctor of philosophy, would be a more suitable instrument for that communication. There must be that element of affinity that allows the two perispheres to interact, like, let's say, a proper size gloves, a right size shoes that you put it on and it fits perfectly and you feel comfortable with it. When you have that fit, perispirit to perispirit entanglement, things will happen rapidly, easy, and in there the spirit will find all the necessary tools to pass the message because that medium is familiar with the topic of discussion, in the case philosophy, right? And of course, a piano player giving the opportunity to select will choose the piano that he feels more comfortable with, the type of piano, the size of the piano who is easiest to be tuned, than the one that is an older one that cannot be tuned anymore or anything else. The piano player will use what's available, but you select the better one. But all of them will play the music somehow, right? And the problem, yes, and Erasmus says, yes, of course, they will like to have more enlightened, educated class of individuals to help us to spread spiritism. And this is a historical point here. This applies mostly to historical, the divulgation and preparation of the doctrine of spiritism. Spiritism and develop writing mediumship. Although in such a classes we also encounter the most incredible, rebellious, and morally depraved individuals. So here's the problem: that very often the one better educated have unfortunately become the most incredulous. I don't believe in this thing because now we're too smart to deal with things of the spirit. Think the spirit of the spirit is for uneducated people, and all of those prejudices that unfortunately have happened or was happening at that time, as put clearly as a historical factor here. Remember, that was the time of that liberation, that the intellectual class finally was free from the imposition of the church, and they took a very radical position against things of the spirit, as perhaps out of fear that they would be prisoners of the religious things once again. They are running away from that. But unfortunately, it was and it is today, I believe, not as much, of course, that the the better educated class would not allow themselves to be a good instrument. They do have the knowledge, they do have the understanding, but they are incredulous. They are essentially materialistics, and that makes it impossible for them to be utilized as medium, of course. And even for the reps, they usually less serious individuals, because they were very interested in the phenomena. They wanted to see things happening that there was attractive to the eyes, but they didn't care much about things that pertains to the intellect, that pertains more to the more elevated intelligent processes. Keep in mind here that an educated person may not get all the education from school. It's not. It doesn't mean that spirits are lose someone with college education or PhDs in this and that subject. Individuals may be extremely capable, extremely well educated, without having a diploma, without having a degree. And some may have tremendous amount of education acquired from previous reincarnation, not necessarily from this one. Again, Chico Xavier didn't even complete really the basic education. And I don't know if Divaldo has a college degree. I don't think Divaldo has a college degree even.
No,
No,
it does not.
I know he has more education than Chico.
Yes.
Perhaps what's the equivalent of a high school, perhaps, towards here.
Yeah, I think he has. In the previously in Brazil, you had this normal school, as I call, which was a sort of a something for very
Technical, basically.
Yeah, technical course. He has one of those, that you can do for for specific questions.
Yeah, and Chico didn't even completed middle school, even before high school. He did not even that he completed. So yeah, so his education was from that previous incarnation very limited. But in order to produce the books that both of them produces, they have to have tremendous amount of knowledge, of intellectual abilities of their mind and of their heart. There was, I mean, the one of the heart is always expressed. I mean, it's, our moral qualities are always expressed in any time, in any reincarnation, as the case, of course, of Chico and Uvalde. But the intellectual abilities of both is expressed in the psychographies. Because again, the spirit cannot put anything in there. He can only retrieve what's already there. And for Chico Xavier to provide psychographies that deals with, let's say, with the hypothesis or neuroscience that even at that time it was unknown, because he already had that knowledge somewhat, somewhere, to be able to be expressed in a book. So I'm just want to make a point over here. The Erasmus not say that, you just want people who are college graduate, you just want people who has a PhD in that. No, that's not it. But one who have the humbleness to be used as an instrument, someone's willing to be used as an instrument, and having that, then they will use everything that is in there that they can use. The more they have in there, the easier it is for them to communicate, to pass the thoughts through. The less, the more difficult, the more tedious would be. But still, they will utilize anyone who has the goodwill, anyone who is humble enough, or anyone who's willing to be served as an instrument at the hands of those spirits. And they'll be happy to use it. Okay.
Yeah, I had to stop.
Seriously? Okay, so all right. Any final question, or you say for next week?
Better for Sunday.
Oh, Sunday. Perfect. Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we say our prayer.
Thank you.
To our spiritual benefactors, we're going angels, with our hearts full of gratitude again as we gather here tonight in our studies in the Spirit's book and the Medium's book. We thank you. We thank you for the opportunity of understanding, and most important, to put into practice and continue throughout the week with our studies, guiding and helping us on this planet Earth. We pray, dear Father, for the United States Spiritist Federation, the United States Spiritist Council, for our teachers that continue to help us with these studies every week with patience and with great hearts. We thank them. We pray for all of our family members, friends, and all that are going through difficulty still on this planet Earth. May we continue throughout the week with studies and prayers and return again next week with our hearts full of gratitude. We thank you, dear Lord, and with that in mind, we ask permission to close our meeting tonight. So be it.